It began with a scream that wasn't just loud, it was volcanic. Kellyanne Conway's voice sliced through the live broadcast, shaking the studio like a thunderclap no one had braced for. The anchors froze mid-breath, eyes wide, scripts forgotten in their hands. A murmur rippled through the audience, the kind of gasp that fills a room when something unscripted, raw, and dangerous has just detonated before their eyes. Conway leaned forward, her face tight with fury, words spilling out like fire meant to scorch rather than persuade. She pointed, jabbed, and raised her voice higher still, as if sheer volume could bury the truth. In that instant, the debate no longer looked like a civil exchange. It looked like a storm, one woman raging against a force she could not control. And then came the silence. Not from Conway, but from everyone else. A silence so thick it pressed against the walls. A silence where millions watching at home leaned closer to their screens. Somewhere between her scream and her sneer, Twitter lit up like fireworks. Hashtags exploded, clips replayed, captions screamed in all caps. Kellyanne loses it. The moment was viral before it had even ended. But at the center of the storm, there was another figure. Jasmine Crockett sat with an almost unnerving stillness. Her hands folded, her eyes locked forward. Not rattled, not cowed, not even blinking at the storm's swirling inches from her face. To the casual viewer, it may have looked like passivity. But to those who knew, it was discipline. It was power. It was the kind of calm that terrifies the loud, because it cannot be shaken. Every camera angle told the same story. One woman flailing, the other unmovable. Conway screamed to dominate. Crockett waited to transform. And though no words had yet left Jasmine's lips, the audience could already sense it. When she finally spoke, the moment would not belong to the scream. It would belong to the reply. In a world where rage often drowns out reason, something astonishing was about to happen. And what unfolded next would leave millions speechless. But the story didn't begin here. To understand why this moment went viral, we need to rewind. To understand why this confrontation mattered, you have to step back and see the stage it unfolded on. America in this moment was not calm, not unified, not searching for middle ground. The nation was divided into echo chambers, each side shouting past the other, every debate turning into a performance more than a pursuit of truth. It was an age where facts were bent until they broke, where identity was weaponized, and where television studios often became gladiator arenas. Into that landscape walked Kellyanne Conway, a woman who had long thrived in chaos. She was no stranger to cameras, no stranger to the art of controlling headlines by bending words until they gleamed like mirrors, shiny but deceptive. She was the architect of alternative facts, the strategist who had spun outrage into currency and division into power. Her fans saw her as unflinchingly loyal. Her critics saw her as the queen of spin, capable of twisting any question into an attack on her opponents. She had built her reputation on volume, certainty, and a willingness to say what others would not dare. And facing her sat Jasmine Crockett, a newcomer by comparison, but no stranger to battles of her own. Her rise had not come through spin, but through persistence. A civil rights attorney turned lawmaker, she had sharpened her voice in courtrooms where lives were on the line. She wasn't built for theater, she was built for truth. Yet here she was, in the same studio lights, holding her ground against a political heavyweight who had chewed up and dismissed many before her. To millions watching, this was David versus Goliath, but with a twist. Goliath's weapon was fury. David's was calm. This wasn't just another clash of personalities. It was a clash of visions for the country itself. Conway represented the old guard of politics, where winning meant controlling the narrative at any cost. Crockett represented something newer, something rawer, the belief that dignity and identity could be wielded with pride, that composure could be louder than screaming, and that the truth, unpolished and unspun, could still pierce through the noise. As the debate unfolded, the stakes became clear. This wasn't about a single issue or a single night of television. It was about whether America would reward rage or respect, whether identity could be celebrated without apology, whether immigrants, women, and marginalized communities could see themselves reflected in a leader who did not bend to shouting, but rose above it. And Conway knew the danger of that. Every second Jasmine stayed calm. Every pause she refused to fill with panic, chipped away at the armor of spin that Conway had polished for decades. Because if calmness could defeat chaos, if truth could survive the flood of noise, then what did that say about the entire strategy Conway had built her career upon? Millions of viewers sensed it before it happened. Something rare was about to break through. This wasn't the theater of outrage Americans had grown accustomed to. This was something different, something electric, something unforgettable. And then came the moment. Jasmine leaned forward, her lips parting, ready at last to speak. And what she said in the next 5 minutes would explode across the internet like wildfire. For years, Kellyanne Conway has been a fixture of America's political theater, a name that provokes strong reactions wherever it's spoken. To some, she was a strategist without equal, a political survivor who could outtalk, outmaneuver, and outspin even the most seasoned anchors. To others, she was the embodiment of cynicism in politics, a woman who traded truth for power and mastered the art of never answering a question directly. Her rise to prominence came not from elected office or grassroots activism, but from her uncanny ability to bend narratives. During the Trump era, she became a household name, not for her policy expertise, but for her relentless defense of a president who thrived on chaos. She coined phrases that would echo in political history books, none more infamous than alternative facts. With that single expression, she crystallized an era where truth itself seemed negotiable, where spin became reality for millions, and where deception was dressed up as merely a different perspective. Night after night, Conway could be found on television, parrying questions with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. When pressed, she would dodge. When cornered, she would attack. Anchors who tried to hold her accountable often found themselves interrupted, steamrolled, or ridiculed. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. The tone, the certainty, the absolute refusal to admit error. She could be sharp as a blade, cutting off critics with dismissive smirks and sarcastic quips. For her supporters, it was strength. For her detractors, it was arrogance dressed as confidence. But beneath the polished exterior of control, the contradictions piled up. She often spoke about family values, yet her own family members became some of her harshest critics. Her husband's public opposition to the very administration she defended became a running headline, a living irony. At one point, her daughter took to social media, openly criticizing her mother's politics to millions of viewers on TikTok. It was the kind of contradiction that made even sympathetic audiences squirm. The self-styled champion of order whose own household was consumed by public disarray. Still, Conway pressed on. She cultivated the image of a woman untouchable, someone who could take every insult, every viral critique, and flip it into proof of her resilience. For her, arrogance wasn't a flaw, it was a shield. The louder the opposition grew, the harder she dug in, insisting that she was right, that the media was wrong, that the people criticizing her were blinded by bias. And in a way, that armor worked for a long time. But arrogance is a dangerous shield. It blinds the one who carries it. When every criticism is dismissed, when every challenge is treated as a personal attack, it becomes easy to miss the warning signs. Conway grew used to rattling opponents, to dominating spaces through sheer force of personality. She had built a career on the assumption that if she just shouted louder, if she just doubled down harder, she could outlast any challenger. And then came Jasmine Crockett. On the surface, Conway must have thought it would be another easy sparring match. A rising Democrat, younger, less experienced on the national stage. Surely, Conway believed, her usual tactics would suffice. Interrupt, mock, raise the volume, keep the opponent off balance. She had done it hundreds of times before, but Jasmine wasn't like the others. She didn't play the game the way Conway expected. She didn't rush to respond, didn't let her temper rise, didn't give Conway the satisfaction of watching her flustered. Instead, Crockett absorbed the fury like a stone absorbed a storm, silent, immovable. And in that silence, Conway's armor began to crack. Because arrogance only works when the other side reacts. When no reaction comes, the arrogance begins to look like desperation. The shield begins to look like flailing. And that was the danger Conway never saw coming. For years, she had worn her sharp tongue and her combative style as proof of dominance. But in this moment, those very traits, the dismissiveness, the volume, the refusal to cede ground, were not protecting her. They were exposing her. Her scream that day wasn't just a loss of temper. It was a symptom of something deeper, the unraveling of a strategy that had finally met its limit. Kellyanne Conway built her reputation on spin, on noise, on the armor of arrogance. But this time, in this studio, that armor would become her downfall. And across from her, Jasmine Crockett was about to show why. Long before Jasmine Crockett's calm reply went viral, long before she found herself sitting under the hot lights of a television studio across from one of the most combative political operatives in America, she was simply a girl from St. Louis with a fire in her chest and a determination to fight for those who had no one else to fight for them. Her story didn't begin in the halls of Congress. It began in neighborhoods where opportunity was scarce, where justice was unevenly distributed, and where kids grew up knowing the system was not designed with them in mind. Jasmine saw it. She lived it. And instead of turning away, she decided she would dedicate her life to confronting it. Law was her weapon of choice. Before she was a politician, she was an attorney. But not the kind who chased prestige or lucrative corporate cases. She was a civil rights fighter, the one who stepped into courtrooms on behalf of the marginalized, the overlooked, and the powerless. Time and again, she took on cases others avoided, cases that didn't promise money or headlines, but mattered deeply to the people whose lives hung in the balance. She fought for those wrongly accused, for the working poor, for families whose voices were drowned out by institutions too big to care. And those battles were not easy. She endured long hours, low pay, and the constant uphill struggle of arguing against a system rigged to resist change. But she persisted. Each small victory mattered. Each client who walked out of a courtroom with dignity intact reminded her why she had chosen this path. Through it all, she earned a reputation, not as the loudest, not as the flashiest, but as the one who could not be rattled. Judges saw it. Colleagues saw it. Her clients felt it. Jasmine carried herself with the calm of someone who understood that justice doesn't come quickly, but it comes only to those who refuse to give up. That persistence led her from the courtroom to the State House, and eventually to Congress. Her rise wasn't handed to her. It was fought for, step by step. She knocked on doors. She built coalitions. She listened to communities that too often felt invisible. And when voters sent her to Washington, they weren't sending a politician. They were sending a fighter who had proven again and again that she would not back down when the stakes were highest. But what made Jasmine Crockett different wasn't just her resume or her victories. It was her rootedness. She never forgot where she came from. She never let the titles distance her from the people she served. She didn't walk into rooms demanding respect. She earned it by carrying the voices of her constituents with her. She carried their struggles, their dreams, and their frustrations. That made her relatable. That made her human. And it also made her dangerous to someone like Kellyanne Conway. Because Conway thrived on spectacle, on rattling opponents into making mistakes. But Jasmine wasn't built for spectacle. She was built for endurance. Years in courtrooms had trained her to stay composed under cross-examination, to let tempers flare around her without ever losing her footing. She knew that when you control your calm, you control the room. This was her strength, unshakable composure in the face of chaos. For Jasmine, shouting didn't prove power, it betrayed weakness. And so, when Kellyanne Conway unleashed her scream, when the studio fell into stunned silence, Jasmine did not flinch. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't shift nervously, didn't let her body betray even a flicker of doubt. Instead, she sat as if carved from stone, calm, ready, certain. That was the moment millions of viewers realized something extraordinary was happening. Conway's fury wasn't breaking Jasmine. It was making her shine brighter. The louder Conway raged, the more dignified Jasmine appeared. It was contrast at its sharpest, arrogance unraveling against calm, noise collapsing against truth. For Jasmine Crockett, this wasn't just another debate. It was the culmination of everything she had trained for, every struggle she had endured, every courtroom where she had learned to stand firm when all odds were stacked against her. This was her proving ground, her chance to show that in a country drowning in noise, calm courage still mattered. And so, when the scream came, Jasmine didn't flinch. She was ready, and her reply was about to shake the nation. The scream was only the beginning. Once Kellyanne Conway realized she had not rattled Jasmine Crockett, she doubled down. Her voice, sharp and unyielding, cut across the studio air like a blade. Every time Crockett opened her mouth to speak, Conway would lunge in with another interruption, another mocking quip, another attempt to steal the floor through sheer force of noise. "You don't even understand the basics," Conway snapped at one point, her lips curled in a smirk. "You're new to this game, Congresswoman. Maybe sit down and learn from someone who's actually built something in this country." The anchors shifted uneasily in their chairs. Their job was to moderate, but Conway was barreling over every attempt at order. One anchor glanced at the other with a silent question in his eyes. Should we step in? Should we cut her off? But before either could move, Jasmine Crockett raised her hand ever so slightly, not to demand attention, but to signal that she wasn't shaken, that she would wait. That waiting was powerful. While Conway unleashed her barrage of mockery and disdain, Crockett's stillness became its own performance. The audience at home noticed. On Twitter, real-time reactions erupted. Why is Jasmine so calm? She's letting Kellyanne destroy herself. Another tweet read, "This is the definition of grace under fire." Crockett's silence is louder than Conway's screams. Conway, however, mistook that silence for weakness. She grew bolder, leaning across the table, her fingers stabbing the air, as if to punctuate every accusation. This isn't a courtroom, Congresswoman. This is the real world. And in the real world, you don't win by waiting, you win by fighting. But what Conway didn't realize was that she was fighting herself. With each insult, her voice pitched higher. With each interruption, her frustration became more obvious. And with each jab, Crockett's calm presence made her look less like a warrior and more like a performer losing control of her own act. The studio audience began to feel it too. A nervous chuckle rippled through the crowd when Conway interrupted yet again, her words tumbling over themselves in her rush to dominate. The anchors cleared their throats, trying to regain order, but Conway wouldn't stop. It was as if she believed the debate could be won simply by filling every second of airtime with her voice. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat upright, hands folded, eyes forward. Her silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. Years of courtroom battles had taught her that when someone unravels in front of you, the best weapon is patience. Let them rage. Let them overextend. When the time comes to strike, the contrast will be undeniable. And the contrast was undeniable. Conway's face was flushed now, her words coming faster, sharper, spilling into rants that no longer landed with precision, but scattered in every direction. She was speaking at Crockett, not to her, as if trying to bury her under an avalanche of noise. But Crockett didn't budge. At home, viewers leaned in closer. Is Jasmine ever going to respond? One tweet asked. Another replied, she doesn't need to. Her calm is destroying Kellyanne in real time. The hashtags were already forming, climbing the trending list before the exchange had even ended. The anchors finally tried to interject, but by now the imbalance was clear. One woman was unraveling in public. The other was quietly, methodically waiting for the perfect moment. The longer Jasmine waited, the more the anticipation grew. Every viewer knew, when she finally speaks, it will matter. And then, after what felt like an eternity of chaos, after every interruption, every mockery, every desperate attempt to break her composure, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. Her hands unfolded, her lips parted, and then, with the nation watching, Jasmine finally spoke. The studio, for a moment, seemed to stop breathing. After the storm of interruptions, the jabs, the accusations, the mockery hurled like stones across the table, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward and finally broke her silence. Her voice, when it came, was low, not soft but steady. It wasn't the voice of someone trying to dominate the room. It was the voice of someone who already knew she owned it. Ms. Conway, Jasmine began, her eyes fixed firmly ahead, her tone calm enough to cut through the static of tension. I've spent my career in courtrooms where yelling doesn't win a case. Evidence does. Respect does. Truth does. The words fell into the silence like a gavel. The anchors froze. Kellyanne blinked, caught off guard by the composure. For the first time all night, she didn't have an immediate interruption ready. Jasmine had spoken with such deliberate calm that even Conway's instinct to interject faltered. Jasmine let the pause stretch, her gaze unwavering. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't scrambling to fit her points in before being cut off. She was controlling the tempo, every second making Conway's earlier frenzy look even more desperate. I understand you've made a career out of shouting down opponents, Jasmine continued, her tone never rising. But the people I represent, they don't need noise. They need answers. They need dignity. They need leaders who remember that screaming at someone doesn't make you right. It just makes you loud. A murmur swept through the audience. The anchors glanced at each other, their eyebrows raised, as if silently acknowledging, she's landing this. Conway shifted in her seat, her arms folding tightly, her jaw clenching. She forced a smirk, but it wavered at the edges. The power dynamic had flipped, and everyone could see it. Jasmine pressed on. You accuse me of being inexperienced. But my experience is fighting for people who don't have power, who don't have megaphones, who don't get booked on primetime interviews. And the truth is, those voices matter more than any soundbite you could deliver in this studio. Every sentence was surgical, measured, precise, unshakable. Like a trial lawyer building her closing argument, Jasmine wasn't trying to overwhelm with volume. She was dismantling with logic, with dignity, with the kind of composure that can't be faked. Conway tried to interject. She began, her voice pitched high, defensive. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She simply raised her hand slightly, palm out, not aggressive but firm. The gesture silenced Conway before she could regain steam. And in that silence, Jasmine delivered the line that turned the entire exchange viral. You can scream at me all you want, she said, her voice calm, her cadence unshaken. But screaming doesn't change the truth. And the truth is, I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to fight for the people who sent me here. And they deserve better than this circus. The audience gasped, then broke into applause. Not wild, chaotic applause, but the kind of sharp, knowing applause that says yes. That's it. That's the line. The cameras caught Conway's face in that moment. Her eyes narrowing, her mouth twitching between a scowl and a forced grin. She leaned back, suddenly small in her chair, the volume gone from her once commanding voice. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She leaned in just slightly, not to intimidate, but to underline her final point. You build a career on spinning stories, she said. I built mine on listening to them, on fighting for them. And if you think shouting me down will change that, you're mistaken. Because this country is tired of being shouted at. They're ready to be heard. The applause grew louder now. Even the anchors, trying to maintain neutrality, couldn't suppress the faint smiles tugging at their lips. They knew they were witnessing a moment, one that would replay endlessly in highlight reels, one that would be dissected by commentators for days to come. Jasmine leaned back, her expression serene, her posture steady. She had said enough. She didn't need to add more. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, charged with the weight of a mic drop that didn't require theatrics. Conway tried to recover. She forced out a laugh, shaking her head, muttering something about rookies and grandstanding. But the effort fell flat. The contrast was too stark. Where Jasmine radiated calm authority, Conway now looked rattled, cornered, defensive. Her earlier dominance had evaporated, replaced with the unmistakable air of someone who had been outplayed. Social media, meanwhile, was already exploding. Clips of Jasmine's line, screaming doesn't change the truth, were being clipped, captioned, and shared at lightning speed. Tweets flooded in. This is the moment Jasmine Crockett went national. Kellyanne screamed. Jasmine ended her with calm. Hashtags began climbing. Hashtag calm wins. Hashtag Crockett clapback. Hashtag dignity over division. Back in the studio, the air felt different. The storm had passed, and what remained was clarity. Jasmine had shifted the energy of the room. She hadn't just answered Conway. She had redefined the terms of the debate. It wasn't about who could shout the loudest. It wasn't about who had the sharpest quip. It was about who carried themselves with dignity when tested. And in that moment, there was no question. Jasmine Crockett had turned a scream into her stage, and her calm reply had just rewritten the story. But if the studio was stunned, the internet was about to erupt. The moment Jasmine Crockett's words left her lips, the studio was frozen. But outside those walls, the world was already catching fire. Within seconds, clips of her reply were uploaded, retweeted, and remixed across every social platform. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of them turned into echo chambers of awe. The line, "Screaming doesn't change the truth," became the rallying cry of the night. One tweet that rocketed to hundreds of thousands of likes read, Jasmine Crockett just ended Kellyanne Conway's career in 15 seconds. Another added, we just witnessed grace in real time. Calm, chaos. Memes flooded the timeline. One split screening Conway's red-faced scream beside Jasmine's serene composure, captioned, noise versus dignity. Another went viral, showing Conway's face mid-scream with the text, when spin meets stone. The hashtags were relentless. Hashtag Crockett clapback. Hashtag dignity over division. Hashtag calm wins. By midnight, Jasmine's name was trending above global news events. Teenagers on TikTok edited her line into mashups with movie soundtracks, giving it the weight of a superhero moment. On Instagram, Reels spliced her calm delivery into cinematic slow motion, captions exploding in bold fonts. This is what leadership looks like. The frenzy didn't stop with social media. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story. Headlines screamed across digital front pages. Kellyanne Conway melts down on live TV as Jasmine Crockett holds her ground. Calm clapback goes viral. Jasmine Crockett steals the show. Cable networks replayed the moment again and again, dissecting every detail. Crockett's pauses, her unwavering eye contact, the exact second Conway's confidence seemed to collapse. Analysts debated whether this was a turning point in how political debates are fought in the age of social media. And then came the celebrity reactions. A-list actors, athletes, and musicians joined the chorus. One Oscar-winning actress tweeted, Jasmine Crockett is my spirit animal. An NBA star posted on Instagram, this is how you deal with trash talk, calm and collected. Even late-night comedians, usually merciless with their satire, had little interest in mocking Jasmine. Their jokes were reserved for Conway's unraveling scream, which quickly became late-night monologue fodder. One host quipped, Kellyanne tried alternative facts, then tried alternative volume, and lost both. Kellyanne Conway, once master of controlling the narrative, found herself losing it entirely. For perhaps the first time, she wasn't the one spinning the headlines. She was the punchline. Memes painted her as unhinged. Clips of her scream were set to heavy metal soundtracks, played in endless loops, contrasted with Crockett's calm reply. The imbalance was humiliating. Conway had come to dominate, but the internet crowned Jasmine instead. And in that crowning, something larger began to shift. Commentators pointed out that this wasn't just entertainment. It was symbolism. Jasmine Crockett's composure had reframed the conversation about politics itself. For years, shouting matches had dominated television screens, each side trying to out-yell the other. But here was proof that dignity could be louder than volume, that a steady tone could go viral in a world addicted to outrage. In barbershops, in college dorms, in immigrant households watching with pride, the story was retold not as a clash of two women, but as a clash of two visions of America. On one side, the politics of noise, arrogance, and spin. On the other, the politics of truth, representation, and self-control. People saw in Jasmine Crockett someone who mirrored their own battles, staying composed while facing condescension, refusing to be rattled by those who underestimated them. The ripple effects were immediate. Young activists began quoting Jasmine's line at rallies. Teachers replayed her moment in classrooms as an example of how composure beats chaos. Parents showed it to their children as proof that strength doesn't have to shout. Even in Washington, whispers began to circulate. Crockett's name, once confined to a narrow political circle, now carried national weight. Her viral moment wasn't just a clapback, it was a branding. She had entered the national consciousness not as a hothead, not as a partisan flamethrower, but as a figure of dignity in an era starved for it. And for Kellyanne Conway, the damage was clear. Once hailed as one of the sharpest operatives of her generation, she had been reduced to a meme, the woman who screamed and lost to silence. Every attempt she made to spin the incident fell flat. No explanation could compete with the viral clip looping endlessly across screens, always beginning with her scream and ending with Jasmine's calm mic drop. The world had chosen its winner, and as Jasmine Crockett's star began to rise, one truth became undeniable. Politics had just been reminded that dignity still has the power to shake the room. But the ripples were not finished yet. Because if the studio erupted and the internet exploded, the deeper question remained: what did this moment mean for America's soul? The answer would come in the reflection that followed. The clip had already become legend, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't content to let it be reduced to just another viral moment. When the frenzy settled and the anchors finally regained their footing, Jasmine leaned into her microphone with the kind of calm certainty that had just disarmed a veteran political operative. Her words carried the weight of something larger than a clapback. "You don't have to scream to speak the truth," she said quietly, but with undeniable conviction. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a philosophy, a creed, a reminder to every viewer who had ever been shouted down that volume is not victory. That single sentence reframed the clash. What had looked like a petty shouting match minutes earlier was now something symbolic, something instructive. Kellyanne Conway's scream had become the emblem of chaos, of a politics addicted to noise and distraction. Jasmine Crockett's reply, on the other hand, was dignity distilled into words. She didn't just defend herself. She defended the very possibility of truth in a world bent on drowning it out. The moral was simple, but powerful. Dignity is greater than rage, composure greater than chaos, justice greater than noise. It was the inversion of everything America had been conditioned to expect from political television. For years, audiences have been told that the loudest voice wins, that power belongs to those who dominate the conversation. But here was proof of the opposite, that true strength lies in restraint, that clarity can outshine fury, and that the calmest voice in the room can end up being the one that echoes loudest. And beyond the drama of the studio, the lesson touched a nerve in a country tired of division. Jasmine's moment spoke to something aching inside the American spirit, the hunger for politics rooted in respect, the yearning for leadership grounded in truth rather than performance. In an age of misinformation, where alternative facts had too often replaced honesty, Crockett's reply was more than a comeback. It was a recentering. It told viewers that democracy doesn't have to be a shouting contest. It reminded them that the republic isn't sustained by noise, but by voices willing to stand calmly, firmly, and unapologetically for what is right. Her words carried particular resonance for immigrant families, marginalized communities, and those who had been told they didn't belong. Crockett's calmness was not the quiet of submission, but the confidence of belonging. It was the refusal to be baited into rage, the insistence that one's truth does not need to be screamed to be real. To millions watching, it felt like representation, not just of a politician, but of their own struggles to be heard with dignity. The lesson extended beyond politics. Parents repeated her words to their children. Teachers invoked her reply in classrooms. Faith leaders quoted her in sermons. Because at its core, Jasmine's line wasn't just about one debate. It was about the way people navigate a noisy world. It was about every workplace meeting where someone gets talked over, every family dinner where the loudest relative dominates, every online argument where reason seems drowned by rage. "You don't have to scream to speak the truth" became more than a clapback. It became a mantra, a reminder that truth doesn't depend on decibels, that integrity doesn't require theatrics, that leadership isn't about overpowering others, but about elevating the conversation. And in that moment, Crockett wasn't just defending herself. She was modeling a different way forward for America, a way where politics could be more than insults, where disagreements could be more than combat, where truth could survive not by shouting louder, but by standing taller. As the cameras cut to commercial, the sense of finality was palpable. The scream would be remembered, yes, but it would be remembered as the prelude to a lesson far greater than itself. Jasmine Crockett had turned a moment of chaos into a parable for democracy, and in doing so, she had given America something it hadn't had in a long time: hope that dignity could still win. But even as the credits rolled and the hashtag soared, one final question lingered in the air. Would people merely share the clip, or would they carry its lesson into their own lives? That answer would lie not in the studio, not on Twitter, but in the choices of every viewer who had just witnessed calm conquer chaos. And so, we return to the moment that started it all. Kellyanne Conway's scream, echoing across a live television studio, desperate and unrestrained. A sound designed to dominate, to distract, to drown out. Yet just across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, calm, composed, unshaken. No raised voice, no theatrics. Just truth, delivered with dignity. That contrast is why the clip still lingers in our minds. Because noise, no matter how loud, always fades. But truth, spoken clearly, calmly, with conviction, endures. It cuts through the chaos, it outlasts the shouting, and it reminds us that character speaks louder than volume. This wasn't just about one scream or one reply. It was about two visions of America, one defined by rage and deflection, the other rooted in dignity, clarity, and courage. And in that studio, before millions of viewers, America saw which vision holds real power. But here's the part that matters most. It's not just Jasmine's moment. It belongs to anyone who's ever been told to be quiet, anyone who's been talked over, anyone who's been made to feel small. Her calm reply was proof that you don't need to scream to shape history. You just need to stand firm in the truth. So if this moment inspired you, don't let it pass as just another clip. Share it. Talk about it. Carry its lesson into your own life. And if you believe in voices of dignity over division, join us here. Subscribe, be part of this community, and help amplify stories that remind us who we are at our best. Because sometimes the calmest voice in the room speaks the loudest to history.